Greetings everyone, Free here. Welcome to the Demo Hub. In today's demo, we're going to take a look at configuring Visual Studio Code for running Streamlit applications. Now, Streamlit is Python based, and the way you run Python code from within Visual Studio Code is a little bit different than how you would run Streamlit applications. We're going to go through that, highlight some of the differences, and show you some configurations that could be relevant to set up your Visual Studio Code environment for running Streamlit applications. That said, let's jump right in with the very first example. Here, I do have a Python file within my working directory. Of course, you're going to want to make sure you're doing this within virtual environment. Here, I'm using Conda, and I do have this virtual environment called Streamlit. Within that, I have Streamlit installed. If I come on the screen here, a very basic Python code to print to the screen, hello world, I can run this, and this code runs successfully. It prints on the screen. Nothing to write home about, very basic stuff. If we're going to do the same thing with Streamlit code, we're going to print on the screen, hello world, Streamlit. So we know Streamlit is not going to print this on the screen. It's going to launch an application. If I were to go in and run this code, it wouldn't necessarily run the way I want it to run. So here it tells us to run this, you have to use Streamlit run. Give it the name of my file, demohub.py. This would run and launch the application for me. No problem with that. Copy this application, come into this browser, and the Streamlit application shows up here, which is what we want. But for me to get that, I had to do Streamlit run. Now, what we want to see here in Visual Studio Code is how we can set this up. So when you hit run or debug, you can do it without necessarily saying Streamlit run. Now, this is where the unique configuration comes into play. So for that, let's go ahead and close this out. Now, to run that, what you're going to want to do is to set up a debugging configurations. There are two ways you can do that. You can come in here and do debug, or one way I typically tend to do it is you can come in here, run the debug file. Now, if you're doing this for the very first time, it's going to ask you to create a Launch.json file, which should show up here. Go ahead and create the Launch.json file when it prompts you. And within the Launch.json file, put in your configuration. You can copy this exactly. I'll take a screenshot and type this in. You're going to need the name of your application, Python, launch, and we're going to tell it the module we're trying to launch. So in this case, we're going to be launching Streamlit. Now, once you have that, save it. Again, your launch.json file should be within the .vscode folder. Once you have that, go now to debug, click on that. And from here in this dropdown, you can click to run that application, Python Streamlit. Well, where is it saying Python Streamlit? If I go back again one more time to my launch.json, it's picking that up here because that's the name of this configuration we gave. Once we have this configuration selected, so Python Streamlit, before we hit run, there's one more thing we're going to want to really validate we have. So here on Mac, you're going to want to do Command-Shift-P to select your interpreter. So just really making sure we're running this within the specific interpreter we have. I'm going to be selecting running this with the Streamlit virtual environment we have. Now, with that said, we're going to make sure we're running Python Streamlit. With that selected, before we hit run, we're going to want to switch to go back to the Python file. So this is a JSON file. The JSON file is telling us to run the current file name. So if you have this open and you run this, it's not going to work. You're going to run into an error. So as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and try that. If I run this, it wouldn't be successful because it's going to be looking for a .py file. Why? Because I have the launch.json open and it's running in the current context. So the way to fix that, this is not really an issue. It's just a user error. The way to fix that will be either close this, go back and open up this demohub.py file, because this is what we want to run. And now if I go back to debug and I go ahead and debug that, you should see this running and opening up on the browser. So if I copy this over to the browser, it should refresh and that code ran successfully. Because we have a breakpoint here, it stopped at the breakpoint. Let's go ahead and continue. And that breakpoint should get past that, and it should print on the screen, hello Streamlit demo hub here. So this would be a way for you to leverage your configuration so you can run Streamlit code without necessarily doing the Streamlit run. Very useful for debugging. And here I do have a breakpoint. If I want, I can take out the breakpoint and rerun this all over. It should just print that on the screen. Now, I do understand that the Streamlit example we have there is a little bit elementary. It's a little bit basic. Let's go ahead, and I do have a more comprehensive Streamlit example. I'm going to copy this from my GitHub and paste that in here. And this is an example we've seen in previous Streamlit demos before. And for this one, let's stop the debugging. If I were to run this again, as simple as coming in here and hitting run, it's going to leverage our configuration file, the Launch.json file, and this should execute. There is no breakpoint. In a few seconds here, I should expect my applications to launch just like that. This is an application. You can move things around, and now you have your Streamlit application running. Now, just one more thing on this Launch.json file. You can have many different configurations, not just one. If I wanted to, I can copy this configuration, put that down. Of course, you're going to need a comma in here. And instead of calling this Python Streamlit, I can call this Python Streamlit prod as an example. You can specify the file either by reference like this, or you can do a demo hub.py as an example, putting the file name as a path. Now with my Launch.json with multiple different configurations, if I come here, I can select run the Streamlit, or I can run Streamlit prod. But either way, depending on the context that I use, it's going to run and launch the necessary application for me. So this Launch.json file is a very relevant configuration to have within your Streamlit application for launching and for debugging. Hopefully this was helpful to you. It's one of those things that's necessary as you're developing with Streamlit and setting up Visual Studio Code. Having this handy, just speeding up development, speeding up debugging. I can put in breakpoints here, and I can debug up to this point. It's like this particular line. I can now debug up to this point, and you have your whole Visual Studio Code experience right at your fingertip as you do Streamlit development. Thanks for watching. This has been Fro with Demo Hub. Hopefully this was relevant. I'll see you in the future demos.